More senior.
Okay, so this is like dress rehearsal for our podcast, PB and Snelly. So it's like, don't worry, this is a big broadcast out. So like, if we mess up, it's just okay, and we'll get it fixed for the other one.
I'll try not to cuss.
Yeah, you cuss a lot. Like, if anybody who's like, we apologize.
I think it was swear card. Maybe my mom was a swear card.
So here's our story. So I'll just start with mine. My name's Patrick Brown. I'm a pediatric epilepsy doctor, working mostly south of Cleveland because my wife drove me to Northeast Ohio. I'm from North Carolina originally. We won't talk about which Carolina is better.
I mean, it was the one that's first settled.
Yeah, South Carolina. So I'm a pediatric epilepsy doctor, but I'm here in that regard. But most of them here is like one of you guys, which is why I love coming to this place so much. I had a seizure when I was 17, and I've been living with epilepsy since. And really, my space is kind of like the inner life of epilepsy, the things that people maybe don't talk a lot about, or I think I've talked to a lot of people this week, and I love coming here because I get to just sit down and hear people's stories. And if I had to summarize my story in one word, it would be like lonely, like a loneliness that was there. Even though I don't know if anybody else can relate to that. Just like when it goes wrong, when everyone's like that. Never felt lonely.
Yes, especially if you have seizures like mine, where it's like 99.99%, etc. of the time, it's just auras where it's obvious I'm scared, supposedly in pain about something, but you wouldn't know.
Yeah. So and I'm talking to a lot of people this week too.
It's technically in my head, but it's not in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking to people this week that I don't know if you've had this experience too, where people look at us and they're like, "You guys, like, that's not what epilepsy looks like. You know, you look too normal to have epilepsy," and so that's another little piece of that. But I think I had my first seizure at 17. I got officially diagnosed right before med school at 24, and so or 23. Trying to like navigate med school like super quietly, like top secret, like in the epilepsy closet. You know, like I don't know, should I say it? Should I not? Okay. I feel like I'm loud enough in the epilepsy closet. I don't know, like, should I say it? Should I not? And trying to figure out, like, when's the right time? What are people going to think? Just navigating all of that. And I really didn't say a whole lot in med school. And then as a child neurology resident down in Houston, I remember having the thought, like, okay, if I can't say I have epilepsy or talk about it as a pediatric neurologist, like, who can? And I had the sweetest group of interns with me. In my first month, I was on child neurology, and I told those guys, and I was like so proud of myself. And then I remember the professor, coming, the attending, and he was like, I want to demonstrate hyperventilation today. If you hyperventilate, it could trigger seizures in certain individuals. And he walks over to me, and he's like, we'll have Patrick. And they were all like, no, not him. And then, fire alarms would go off, and they'd be like diving in front of me. And so, there's that element of you just want to be normal, right? Like, you don't want people to treat you differently. But then on the other hand, it'd be nice to have somebody that maybe understood a little bit. And so the last little piece I'll say right here is probably took me another 5, 6, 7, 8 years. I was working as a pediatric epilepsy doctor, and I had a colleague come in, and they said, the chairman told me that you have epilepsy. And I was like, oh, no. And they said, I do too. And they had JME, with juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, which is the exact kind of epilepsy that I have. And I mean, I don't know, in my memory, I was like crying, tears. But I just remember feeling like, this is amazing. Like, there's someone else in my little narrow lane, right? And we can talk about this later. Like, sometimes that's such a good feeling to know that I got somebody. And this person was as different from me as could be, but just knowing that, like, okay. I mean, and I think it comes down to our humanness, because it's epilepsy, but it's really just being a human. Like, we want to belong, right? And if we could just find some little spots to belong, I think it helps so much. So that's a brief little story of mine. He's got the real good epilepsy story over here. And I know some of you guys that have epilepsy, you have this weird thing where you're like, well, mine's not bad enough to talk about or to share, So he gives me that really bad. Yeah.
We're all in this together. All right, so let's see. I'm Daniel or Dan Snelgrove. That's my alter ego. No, I'm just kidding. And so my epilepsy journey started when I was 12 years old. I was just like a normal kid, absolutely delusional. I was like knew that I was going to be a professional basketball player someday. And if that didn't work out, that was okay. I was also obsessed with Tom Cruise and Top Gun, and I was just like, oh, I'll just go to the Naval Academy and be a naval aviator. Like, obviously, if I can't be in the NBA, right? And I got really sick when I was 12. I think I had mono or something like that. We were up in New York, and I just wasn't feeling well. My family had to cut the trip short. A few months goes by, and I started having issues in my sleep, telling my parents I felt like I was choking at night. And then I think in February of that year, my family heard a pretty loud crash in the middle of the night. I was having like the big one, a big seizure. I actually had a lava lamp that, this was in the 1997 or 8, so lava lamps were still cool. And it was a bloodbath because I'd had a huge seizure, landed on the lava lamp, shattered, cut my back, blood everywhere. I mean, you can imagine like how horrifying that was. It was blue. So that was my introduction into the world of epilepsy. And the day that I was diagnosed, we went through, and obviously we'll talk about all this, just like, I'm a doctor, but I'm very much not a doctor's doctor, I think. And it's because of what I experienced, like if I could cut the BS that you get put through on your journey trying to get a diagnosis, right? And and I had my mom to thank for navigating that. But the day I was finally diagnosed, my parents had recorded a couple videos. We had a doctor where I'm from in Columbia that put me on phenobarbital over the phone and told my family they'd see me in a year. And my family, my mom, right, it's always the moms that are the superheroes, was like, well, I know I'm not a doctor, but that seems kind of weird, right? This is a normal 12-year-old boy, and this is like the beginning of the internet, so you like punch in phenobarbital, and it's like, we're giving him what, right? So the day that I'm diagnosed, we're down at MUSC in Charleston, and the doctor comes in, he reviews the video, the things that my mom and dad had recorded. And he comes in, and he was amazed. This guy named Dr. David Griesemer, and he was like, I remember him saying, something to the effect, like, Daniel, you have epilepsy. And he was in there with like a resident and a medical student. He was like, there's not anything in this world that you can't do with epilepsy. Then he paused for a second. He was like, really? The only thing I can think, is you won't be able to fly airplanes. And I'm like, well, in my head, that's my backup plan, right? I'm like, all right, well, I'll still be an NBA basketball player. But like, he just torpedoed my backup plan. And I just like fall to the floor, just in tears, right? And just hopes dashed and everything. And the next few years sucked from what I can remember. I mean, I had the honeymoon periods where everything was good and I wasn't on a lot of medicine. And, we got this cool thing out called the vagus nerve stimulator. Well, let's throw that in me and see if that helps. And but then as I got older, my seizures got worse. I went from having a handful a month to a handful a week. Then by the time I was a junior in high school, I was, anywhere from 7 to 10 a week. Obviously was not doing well in high school. My basketball acumen had precipitously fallen, and I was obviously not going to play pro sports. And I actually, I withdrew from high school. And my mom, who's the lady in the back, basically was like, this can't be my son's life. And while we fortunately found like good care, I was on 4 or 5 medications, basically was a walking zombie, was still having seizures, and the only answers we were given was like, just keep taking more medicine, right? So that's where my surgery journey began, and ultimately I ended up in Miami at Miami Children's Hospital, and I ended up having epilepsy surgery. I'd kind of been misdiagnosed for a long time. They thought it was just frontal lobe epilepsy, and it turned out it was originating in another area of my brain, and the technology kind of finally caught up, and I had brain surgery. I was able to kind of re-enroll in school, but then like obviously the effects from that, I mean, I took my mom and I were talking yesterday, I was like a straight C student in high school. I think my graduating class, it was like 200 and maybe 25 of us, and I think I graduated. You know, they would give you your class rank. That probably would like make the news this day and age, right? Like, but I was like number 190 something. You know, couldn't get into any school in South Carolina. Even got rejected by the University of Mississippi and Mississippi State, which are, at least at the time, those were like the easiest schools in the country to apply to. I think I got like my rejection letters from them like immediately. So life, I was very pissed off. I was very angry, not a happy kid, hated doctors, had no, you know, I very much had the attitude like, why did this happen to me? You know, what am I going to do with my life? This sucks. And then through the persistence of my mother and my grandmother, they kept telling me, why don't you go to med school? I was like, I hate doctors. Also, I'm an idiot. Have you seen, I couldn't get into college. Hello, right? Anyways, so ultimately, though, that persistence paid off, and the light kind of started to come on for me, and then I realized, okay, like maybe I can do this. And now I'm a neurologist at MUSC, the hospital I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. I did not become an epileptologist, though. And I have certain feelings about that, not to talk bad about my colleagues, but I had a very bad taste in my mouth when I went through medical school and residency and my exposure to what neurology and the world of outpatient neurology was. And I was incredibly frustrated because, you know, here I am. I just happened to be fortunate to fall through the persistence of my family, but also the persistence of the medical team in Charleston. They also wanted me to get answers, and they were super invested in what my life was going to be. And so I had this very naive picture that every outpatient neurologist, every epileptologist, that's how they operate, right? Then when you go through the years of school, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, these guys are clowns. This is an absolute joke. Like, I know, I'm sorry. I know. I'm going to get, like, they'll probably, like, take my medical license from me for saying all this. But what I realized through the years was that my journey through epilepsy, and I love to tell people this, it became my superpower. Like, having epilepsy is a gift in a lot of ways. Yes, it changes your life. Life is different. So now I'm in the neuro ICU at MUSC. I'm what they call a neurointensivist. I deal with acute brain injuries, status epilepticus, so like the far bad side, right, of things. But what I realized is like a different life doesn't mean a bad life, right? There's still a lot of good to be had. And I found my purpose through connecting with people and families. And, you know, in the ICU, I can focus on the patient. I can focus on the family and like walking them through those challenges that my medical team, my epilepsy team that I had helped me with, right? And so that's kind of my gift that epilepsy gave me, is that connection with people. And that's kind of how I ended up, you know, where I am today. And obviously there's a lot of like ups and downs and craziness like along the way. But that's why I care so much about epilepsy. That's why I care so much about, you know, getting out there with everyone and, you know, trying to bring epilepsy out of the shadows. The tall, beautiful man in the back there wearing the Electric Minds t-shirt. So that's Drew Dixon. And Drew was one of my good friends growing up. We played ball together. He was a hell of an athlete, silky smooth on the basketball court. And, you know, my epilepsy journey was like very out there in the open because I was like getting sicker and kind of deteriorating in front of my friends, my family, and, you know, it was going south in a hurry. And there was all this kind of, you know, local hoopla around that. And I'm like failed the 9th grade, withdrew from school my junior year, blah, blah, blah. Well, fast forward after I've had my surgery and I'm in college, finally in college, and Drew calls me up one day. I'm like, oh, what's up, Drew? It's like, man, I had a seizure last night. Like, what? It's like, yeah, I've had epilepsy since I was 14. Hold on a second, dude. I've like literally known you since I was 12. What? You know, and that just shows how much of and my mom said this yesterday, it's like it's genetically imprinted upon us that, you know, us as humans, like if you hear someone has seizures or epilepsy, it's immediately like, oh my God, I can't be around that person. And it's because it makes people uncomfortable, right? And why is that? It's crazy, right? I mean, you have way more people living in this country with epilepsy than you do with Parkinson's disease. It's like 2.5-fold more than people with Parkinson's disease, or even cerebral palsy, Alzheimer's. It's insane. It's like, what is the disconnect here, right? So part of my mission, I feel like in life, my passion is to be with people like you, be with people like Dr. Brown here, and like bring this thing out of the shadows. And I think, and this will be the last thing, and then I promise I'll shut up and whatever, but I think one of the biggest things I learned from epilepsy is like, you go from being hopeless, right? But you got to find the right people to give hope. And having hope is like the biggest weapon we can give somebody. And oftentimes my team will make fun of me in the ICU because I am eternally hopeful for people. And I believe like that's my job. Now, having hope doesn't mean that everything's gonna be hunky-dory and perfect, but hope is very therapeutic too, right? It's having empathy and compassion for people, and I think that's what this community is all about, and trying to get answers. And when it comes to that, empowering people, the patients, the families, hold these doctors accountable. My mom, not college educated, very brilliant woman, getting the runaround from doctors, she knew in her gut, this doesn't seem right? And you don't be afraid to ask questions. And I feel like there aren't enough doctors this day and age saying that. Like, put them on the hot seat. If they're a neurologist, especially if they're an epileptologist, well, they better have some answers. And if they don't have answers, well, why don't you have answers? Help me understand where things are, what can be done, what's being done. That's their job, right? And anyways, that's just, I'll leave it at that for right now.
So good. See, that's a great story, right? Like, and then I had that seizure that time, and I think talking with you guys this week, someone said last year, like, it seems like the kids always have it good. Like, there's like an epilepsy camp for this, and there's an epilepsy camp for that, and we were talking about camps. And in an epilepsy camp in Houston called Camp Spike and Wave was legit, and that's the name, was the first place, and I was a resident down there, the first place where I remember they have like a younger camp and then an older camp, and this was like the younger group. But I remember being there, and they said, well, Patrick, why don't you lead the kids in just kind of like a talk about their stories, like give them a chance to like share their stories. And I remember saying to them, like, let's pretend you're at your school and your teacher says, does anyone here have epilepsy? Raise your hand. Let's see a show of hands. I said, would you feel like raising your hand? And they're like, no, And I said, how about here? Like, everybody here has epilepsy. If I asked you to raise your hand if you've ever had a seizure, would you raise it? And they were like, yeah, like in here, if you've had a seizure or you have epilepsy, let's raise a hand. Look, you guys are pretty good. Right, so that's a lot of us. And one reason I love, this is my third year coming here, is that it's a kind of a, upside down place where like you're weird if you don't have seizures here, right? Like I remember last year getting to meet these guys, and Drew and Dan were sitting over there, and it was just, I'm having like a regular day. I was talking to somebody, like eating a snack, and I turned around and I was like, Drew, when was your last seizure, man? All right, yeah. And then you just go back like this, that doesn't happen in the real world. And so anyway, I was at the camp, and then the kids, I said, well, listen, does anybody want to tell their story, of their seizures? And like they started to come up, and the first little guy's like, yeah, one time I was at the bus stop and I had a seizure, and then the next guy kind of gets in line, and he was like, I had 2 seizures, in gym class, and then they start trying to like one up each other, and it becomes like, all right, I had 2 diastats, and it was in the PICU, and so, and at the end of that, I said, well, I think I had to like muster up the courage to like listen to all of them, and it was really the first time in my life in front of a bunch of people where I said, I have seizures too, and they were like, what? You do too? And it wasn't even what their response was. It was like the first time I remember. It felt like coming home in a way. And I don't know if you guys have had that experience where you like met somebody. I just met somebody. Is it Ashland don't know if she's in here. She's another doctor. I guess there's like a million of us now, like that are doctors with epilepsy. We're going to start our own organization, our own legion of neurologists with epilepsy. But I just met her, and we're all jealous. She's like, "Why am I not talking?" Throw her under the bus, like I just met her. But it was so great to like just connect with her for a minute, and I'm almost like, I think on the inside I'm like, I seem super cool and together on the outside, like Paula knows, but inside I'm like, just kind of like this lonely guy, like, be my friend. Hey, will you be my friend? Hey, could you be my friend? I don't, you guys, and so I think, just to be able to connect with her a little bit, like, oh, you're from 45 minutes away from where I'm from. You had a seizure in high school too. Yeah, your doctor was sort of crappy. Like, mine was weird. He wrote like this and just talked about the military the whole time. Like, why are neurologists the weirdest people on earth? Like, I don't know. And so maybe like, and that's for me, like the first year that I came here, and I talked, I sort of was like just went under the radar. I didn't really know anyone, and I knew one person, and I just kind of like got through. And I don't know if there's some of you that are here, and it's like your first year here, and you're just kind of like, boy, this is a lot of purple, a lot of people that have epilepsy. That's cool, but you're still trying to like this. I think I said this last year. I probably say it every time, but like, get some digits while you're here. I mean, maybe you'll meet that special someone, maybe not, but like, meet some people, get some digits, and like reach out and keep in touch, because I think for me it was really having like one person that I could say like this was like my friend that had epilepsy too, that I could sort of lean on when I needed to, like, made the biggest difference in the world. And so yeah, the first year I was sort of like under the radar. Last year these guys came and I was like, hey, they're pretty cool, that's not too bad. And then like I had to like hang out with Sophie and Olivia, and you're like, oh, they're not too shabby. And then after enough time you end up like, you come in and you're like, oh, I'm like giving high fives to people. And for me, that's just kind of like a life lesson, not even an epilepsy lesson, of like, okay, how can we sort of build these communities that are organic? Because I'm a guy that at 17 that had a diagnosis or had a seizure. I told my wife I was this great high school quarterback, and she went to our reunion and found out I was the backup. And it was like the worst. I was like, I was an amazing quarterback. And she's like, well, who's that guy over there that they're calling QB? But anyway.
I wish I was honest about my
But I was never a guy that would have like sought out a support group. Like, I just, I felt like I would have been like gross. I don't know what am I going to do on an epilepsy support group. I think support groups are fantastic, but I think if you're able to organically build something, sometimes that's a beautiful thing too. But anyway, that's we could talk forever, and this is why I'll pitch to Brad next year. We're going to do a half-day symposium called Being Human with Epilepsy, right? So we get a lot of science, we get a lot of technology. I want to talk about just being human beings with epilepsy, and what does that look like? I think we got enough to go half day on. Yeah. And I think, so it's my last thing. This is never my last thing. Yeah. So the other space that I really like have gravitated towards and loved is sort of just the mental health space. Knowing, like, we talk about comorbidities, those are like a fancy, clunky word to just say, like, yeah, I mean, everyone I've talked to this week, we've talked about our epilepsy, everyone's anxious about, so we're all like, and then my anxiety, and then it's like, of course, or then my depression, or then this bipolar, or then, all of this sort of stuff. And so we know from the data and blah, blah, that like you can have seizure control, and if you're not taking care of all that other stuff, your quality of life is not going to be what we want it to be. So I say, like, let's spend some time and let's focus on that stuff, and we can do that here too.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said the like mental health side of it, because that's kind of what I wanted to say a little something, like, especially next year. Like you said, I mean, I could talk all day about this and all the different facets, right? Because it's like how it affects you personally, your own like life journey, how it affects you mentally, the anxiety, it's like, I had such an amazing crew of friends, and my basketball brothers and my family. And can you please silence that? Okay. All right. but I was still like very much felt alone and like isolated. And that has like never left me. Like that anxiety, what I think people don't understand, like the fact that you could have a seizure at any point in time. I mean, I've been seizure free since August 12th, 2003. And thank you. But I still think about it every single day, right? Because, I mean, I can drive now, but what if this happens when I'm driving over the bridge in Charleston? Or if I'm at the beach swimming with my kids, I'm constantly thinking like, actually, I don't want to go out above my chest. I want to stay like waist deep, right? All my friends make fun of me because I'm in the bed horizontal by like 9 p.m. at night. I don't like staying out late. And that my mom, my family, everybody was so diligent about me making sure I'm getting rest and limiting all those triggers that you can, right? It's just ingrained in me. It like completely changed how I move through life. And I mean, I don't think that's ever gonna, it's who I am now, right? Then the other piece that doesn't get talked about is like the effect that this has on the family, right? And I mean, you almost like, I kind of go through, it's like survivor's guilt in a way, because I mean, this shit is not easy on families. Like what it puts sorry, that was one. Dang it, almost made it through. Okay. I think I made it like 90 seconds last time before I said a cuss word. But, the stress that it puts on the moms, the dads, the husband-wife relationship, then you sprinkle in the siblings, right? And yeah, I mean, my dad had to do Lord knows what to get a vagus nerve stimulator put in me in 1998. Insurance wasn't paying for that, right? So much of the care today still, it's been 20-something years. And I can't speak. I don't have to worry about insurance. That's why I like being in the ICU. I just get to take care of the patient. But you have to navigate that every day, right? And so there's so many things against you when it comes to the diagnosis of epilepsy. But that's why we kind of have to flip this on its head. And, that's why I keep stressing, like, you can't accept some of these, like, weak answers that we get from people in the community, right? And you got to find people like this guy. Because guess what? There's a whole community of docs that want to get you better. That's what Brad and Candy have done with this, right? I mean, this is what it's all about. And better, I realize I'm in the minority. Like, I don't know why, I've been seizure-free. I don't know why I had such a good outcome. Even the data says, so I had extra temporal lobe epilepsy, meaning outside of the temporal lobe, I had a focal area that was causing my seizures, right? Well, even today, if you operate on outside of the temporal lobe for epilepsy, you got about a 40% chance to remain seizure-free, right? 40%. Why am I in that 40%, right? I have no idea. But the one thing I can tell you is don't stop pursuing better answers, better treatments. Because say if you're having 3 seizures a week, 5 seizures a week, 10 a month, even if you reduce that down to 2 a month, 5 a year, that's life-changing. That is completely life-changing, and it's worth it. So anyways, I'll shut up and leave it at that for now.
And we'll leave lots of time for questions for you guys too. So I thought I was a pro. And again, I had epilepsy, starting to figure that out. And you're so right. Like I had been seizure free for over 20, almost like 30 years. Close. I'm old. Yeah, that's like almost older than you. And I think we were like driving around Maui on this 1-lane road. There's like a cliff, and I'm driving the truck. I don't know if you guys have like that voice that's like, you sure don't want to have a seizure right now. Now, like mine kind of sounds like the Noid, or like from, if you're not that old, maybe like the whammy guy from like Press Your Luck. But we were like driving around, and it's the most narrow road. You're like 6 inches from like falling off a cliff. I've got all my wife and my kids there, and that guy just starts going. He's like, boy, it'd be a terrible time. And I'm like, dude, like shut up. Like it's been so long. And so, we talked about this with people today. Like that voice, like, man, how do we manage that and handle that? But I thought I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at having epilepsy. I've been doing the peds epilepsy doctor thing for a while, and really love taking care of families. And then, so I thought I was doing great with that. And then a couple weeks ago, I was, I was driving my daughter to dance. I know my dad had epilepsy, and we think like there's maybe a genetic component, and she's 11. And I'm like, my 16-year-old's doing fine, so I don't have to worry about that. And the sun kind of pops through the trees, right? And we've all been like very like photosensitive. And I looked over, and sweet little Lucy did like a few little jerks over there. And I was like, Lucy, like what's going on over here? And she's like, oh no, Dad, like that just kind of happens when the sun comes through sometimes. And I was like, oh my gosh. And this guy that's like, oh, I'm the professional at epilepsy in every sense of the word, like became maybe like the dad of a kid with epilepsy, and in an instant, like began to understand all the crazy ass moms and dads that you're like, okay, dial down the intensity a little bit. And for the next week, like I was just a mess. I'm like ordering like a 300-page textbook on photosensitivity. I've like looked at all the, photo stimulators that have been produced since, the German models. And well, it depends on the German model. I'm going to understand every possible thing that I can, and we're going to figure this out. And I'm going to call, and I think, boy, that's a new place, for me. And so the cool thing is, another cool thing about being here is that I had like my little my Ask Dr. Brown booth, and so this family stopped by, and they have been through it. I think the mom had epilepsy. They have a couple of kids with epilepsy. They lost a child, with PCDH19 epilepsy, and I just sort of flipped it around on her and told her the story. I said, what advice would you have for me? And she said, she just had so much great advice. And then she says, I've written 5 books on epilepsy, and here's my comprehensive guide to epilepsy. And so I'm like, okay, well, there you go. Like, give the epilepsy doctor the parent's comprehensive guide to epilepsy. And so I think that just goes to show, like, we are really all in this together. And so, like, please don't, I know a lot of times we get into these, like, talks, and we play this little, like, bullshit game, like, hey, I'm way smarter than you. Yeah, that's one. We got to tie it up. We do this little act, like, I'm way smarter than you. Come listen to me and all my expertise. And we really are so much more alike than different. So, like, we've all been on the same sort of journey, and it could be different, right? Like, but there's so many similarities to that. And so I think that's the beauty of you guys being here, and we can learn from each other. So, like, please, don't think like, I've got this guy that's my mentor who like started a whole field of therapy called ACT therapy, and he's just so great at calling people on their stuff. And he's like, look, some people deal with like being a human, like suffering as a human by, addiction or this or that. Some people get a whole lot of letters behind their name, and they're still just trying to solve the same problems of being a human in the world. So I think us being together, no matter how many letters people have behind their name, like just knowing that we're in this, as a family, really kind of makes it fun for me. So I don't know. That's about all I've got. What do you have?
Oh, I mean, I could go all day.
We could all go. So yeah, come back next year for our 7-week series on the last thing. And Pat, the last thing I will say, someone last year said, what about for adults? Like, why are there no like camps for adults? So I was back on Maui. I tend to end up there somehow, and there's a great spot. I found it for us. It's called Lumeria, and they have retreats there over and over, right? And so I've got my friend like Kelly Wilson, who's a fantastic therapist. We've got somebody that was like a 5-time windsurfing champion. He was like, I think he windsurfed a door and won something. So like, we've got some cool stuff in the works. So like, if you guys just sort of stay tuned, we can dial some of that in too.
Yeah. I was trying to think before I know probably a lot of people have, or not a lot of people, just some questions, right? I think the thing with adults, it's a lot of noise is being made, and a lot of this is all through kids, right? And one thing, I'm an adult doctor, and I see people with epilepsy in the ICU as adults. And what's fascinating to me is that they don't feel like they're a part of this community, right? And I get that so frequently, and I think probably since I've been here since last year, anytime I get a patient like that in the ICU, I've given Brad probably 4 or 5 people's numbers and I live in South Carolina, right? And Brad's in Texas. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. We've stopped your loved one's seizures. They're waking up from their coma, right? We've done all this crazy stuff to put the fire out. But it's just like there is this need, right, for adults to feel this community. And, I'm hopeful for the future. I don't want it to sound like I'm like a fatalist, too, when it comes to, like, epilepsy care. I think a lot of people agree that we can be doing a lot better. And our healthcare system sucks. I will say that. It's demoralizing, but you can either choose to live in that cycle that everything's terrible and the world's awful. But I promise you, there are far more doctors, nurses, people out there that truly care and are doing it for the right reasons. And we outweigh all the other BS in the medical system. It sucks because you have to navigate it yourself. And that's why you can't do it yourself. That's why you got to rely on the community, right? You got to rely on making these and I wish it wasn't like that, but at the same time, that's just the way it is. And you got to make a decision, right? Like, do you want to be a part of the community? Do you want to help each other, help yourself, get that, right? That treatment just from the community and not just from the doctor. I mean, there's something therapeutic about getting it out there and speaking your truth. And it's scary as hell because people don't understand epilepsy, like I said at the beginning, and it makes you, I don't think hell counts as a swear word, right? Okay, all right. But it's like, it's terrifying, right? But I firmly believe you got to do it. And, anyways, I'll just leave it at that. Maybe we can pass the microphone around. And
I loved the great Phil Donahue. So this is the part of the show where we'll just come find you if you have a question. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So I have a question. I have 2 kids, a spouse. Sometimes my spouse is not home and I'm home with the kids. We typically always have another adult in the house if I'm alone. What have you guys done as parents to protect your kids if you're home without your spouse? How have you navigated that as doctors, knowing the risks of being alone without a person who doesn't have epilepsy?
I might not be the best.
It's going to be tough for us because we've been seizure-free probably for a while. Is that right? Does anybody else in the room have... Oh, we got it. We got one.
So I love that I've been seizure-free.
I'm not sure. What are the ages of your children?
So I have a 4-year-old and a 9.5-year-old.
Okay.
The 9.5-year-old is capable, 4-year-old not.
Yeah.
He's been seizure-free for
Over 3 years.
over 3 years.
Great. So when my child was a newborn, I adapted to things like changing her on the floor all the time, making sure I slept when she slept, never bathed her alone, always had somebody there. About the age of 5 was the first time she seen me have a grand mal seizure. Kids these days, very tech savvy. She was always on my phone. I put a lock on my phone, and within about 30 seconds, I realized I can't have a lock on my phone. So we had to teach her how to call grandma, how to call 911. I don't know about your neighbors. We were good friends with our neighbors, so we had to teach her, need to run next door if you can't get a hold of anyone. So just opening that dialogue with them at a very young age. I really don't think it can be too early. Kids are very resilient, so I think they'll understand.
100%. And I'm very much in favor of, like, you can't, and I say this as like a father now. I have a five, she'll be 6, I think, this weekend. Yeah. My wife's not here, so I can say I think. She'll be 6 this weekend, Mom, I think. Yeah, okay. So I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, but I firmly believe, too, like, part of the problem with epilepsy is that we have kept it in the shadows, even, like, as the patients. So I don't necessarily, and this is why I said I'm not a good person to answer this, because I don't believe in changing anything about my life. I think about it. Sure, it's on my mind, like I said. But you know what? Like, my kids know about the epilepsy community now. My daughter was like, are you going to the epilepsy conference? You know, and I think it's a part of, you know, God, I hope they don't have to see it one day. But you can't shield them from life. You can't shield them from this thing that you have or have had, right? Because there's always that chance that it might happen again. You haven't had a seizure in 3 years. You know, I haven't had one in over 20, but I still think about it. But I think I make sure to know that my kids know what epilepsy is. They know what seizures are. And I think you got to do, you know, the precautions that you take. And I mean, I take precautions, like I said, right? And I don't, on paper at least, I don't have a reason to take precautions, but I still do it. But I also, there's something very empowering about not changing your life either, right? We've had to change our lives enough with the diagnosis, right? So there's something empowering too by just living your life and getting out there and sharing that knowledge, that information, and teaching your kids, hey, this is a part of our life, right?
And you're doing great, right? I mean, and again, like, this is, we'll talk to like kids and families of everything, you know. You get 3 months seizure free. Okay, that feels pretty good. You get 6 months. You get a year. I don't know for you guys. Like, is there ever like when's the time where you're like, okay, you know, like it's different for everybody, and it feels, you know, it feels rough and heavy, and you wish you could be like, all right, now I'm good. I can cut loose, you know. But only you're gonna be able to know, like, okay, I got it now, you know. Because there's some of us that are like, all right, it's been 2 months. You know, like someone asked me today, like after you had your seizure, like, then what did you do? And I was like, well, I was supposed to not drive for 6 months, but I had to drive to school, so I didn't drive for a couple weeks. And then I got a summer job. I wasn't on medication. I got a summer job as a lifeguard. So I was like on the stand, you know, watching the kids, you know, up there. So like, don't listen to whatever I did, you know. And then I was, you know, cracking Budweiser. No, I wasn't. But you know, like, I know it was bad. I know it was really bad. Anybody else have a question for anybody in here? Like, we're all here.
Hi, doctor.
Hello.
Okay. With your experience as doctors and being a parent who has epilepsy, what have you noticed or have you learned? What are the stimuli or the causing or predisposing aspects or factors that induce the patient to have seizures? Like in the scenario of your daughter is the light. Could there be like the environment, bad smell, the food, or I know stress and lack of sleep?
Okay, look, we're gonna just see how smart you guys are. I want you to call out triggers for seizures, and then if it's like right and smart, I'll give you a smile. And if it's like a dumb answer, I'll be like, no, that's wrong, stupid. All right, does anybody know? All right, you.
Dehydration, heat stress, physical
You
exertion.
get one. All right. Those are, I agree with it.
Lack of sleep.
Yeah. So if you look at it, especially people with generalized epilepsies, and some people will only have seizures that are triggered by certain things, like sleep deprivation is like always going to be top of the list. So really, sleep deprivation's a big one.
The rock star in the back of the room is like,
Whoa. Oh yeah, true.
Caffeine.
All right, let's see. Yeah, I think I'll put caffeine on there. Like, you know, like if you're maybe pounding 38 Dr. Peppers or something like that. I think so. All right, my man.
Flashing lights.
Oh, flashing lights. What's your name?
Dylan.
What?
Dylan.
Dylan, how old are you?
7.
7-year-old Dylan just nailed it. Flashing lights is in there, absolutely. And that's why, right, when you get your EEGs, they do flashing lights. What else do they do? They do hyperventilation, right? You blow on a pinwheel. So hyperventilation, okay.
Alarms at the school when they do the fire drills, those hurt me a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
What's your name?
Hudson.
This is Hudson. I met him yesterday. I live in Hudson. How crazy is that? So alarms for fire drills get him. So, okay, we got sleep deprivation, flashing lights. What's another one, maybe top 3? Yes.
Catamenial.
So catamenial, like around your period, for those of us that have those, that's a real thing, right? And so there's some people, like I had a patient last week that only had seizures like during or around her period. So it's like you can kind of work around that sometimes. Fantastic. I know you. Didn't meet you last year. Yeah. What's your name?
Roman.
Yeah, Roman.
So stress.
Yeah. Definitely stress. I mean, I think stress can play into it, and then stress can lead into all the sleep deprivation and all that sort of stuff too. What are you up to now? Tell everybody.
Yes. So I just graduated my master's in engineering. So I'm focusing becoming a civil engineer to geotechnical engineering. So specializing.
I told y'all that story, right? I had a colleague, an epilepsy doctor. I was like looking at a picture of my friend, sad story. He had died of SUDEP, but he had epilepsy, was teaching drama in New York, and my colleague, who was an epilepsy doctor, came in, and he said, "Who's that guy?" And I told him the story. He goes, "Are you sure he had epilepsy? He looks too high functioning to me." And I was like sitting there with epilepsy, having not told him, and I'm like, all right, fantastic. All right, what do we got?
I already said my 3 things, but adding on to, what was your name, Hudson? Basically anything, for a very long time, I would always have them around breakfast time, and I didn't, like starting when I was, 13 or so, it took me another 10 years or so for me to finally figure it out. I would go from basically sound asleep to being like completely upright in less than a second. Otherwise, I would change my alarm because I didn't want to sleep through it. That sudden shock would cause a seizure. And also, once, it's like basically anything that's...
You got 17 answers, Sophia. You're killing it. You're hogging.
Anything that makes...
You're high. Yes, that's great. So yeah, and sometimes there can be things that we try to figure out. Is it a trigger or not? It's like early morning. Some people will just have seizures early morning, so it may seem like, well, yeah, this time of day. My wife had her hand raised. Sorry.
Alcohol.
Alcohol, yes. All right. Someone from Minnesota back here. I think I spoke with you. We spoke together years ago. Yeah, I know.
Mine would happen. I would get John Vu seizures when I was running.
Running. Absolutely true. Some people can have like exercise-induced. Are you writing all these down? You got them?
I think the big point is, though, that everybody's triggers are different, right? So for me, it was Benadryl, dextromethorphan with cough suppressant, right? So now when I get sick, I'm just riding that thing out, right? Another one, and I can speak, things are a lot better in the 21st century. Probably some people in the room won't want to hear me say this, but weed. And the caveat is, and just the science side of it, there are a lot of medical marijuana. Obviously, Jaden's juice, there's this incredible thing going on now with the therapeutics of natural stuff. I went through a period when I was really bad, and I can say this now because, I didn't end up in jail or anything, but the THC content of marijuana can actually precipitate seizures, and people don't fully understand that. Now everything's so genetically engineered, though. The weed we were getting back when I was in high school, and I'll say this, I think it's important to say this because my mom is about to have a heart attack back there. It was like some not what we have today, but I think that's important because I want to say that because for me, I wanted something that might help me. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, I used to ask my neurologist every time I went to Charleston if I could be enrolled in a study for weed. So I was just like, all right, well, there's no sign. I'm just going to start smoking weed. Well, guess what happened when that happened? I started having more seizures, right? So I just always like to throw that out. But I think the takeaway is as you move through life, you're going to build what those things are that stress your system. And what I tell families, the brain is just a computer at the end of the day, right? Epilepsy is one of those things that makes your computer not operate efficiently for whatever reason, right? But you know, you got to find ways to optimize your operating system, right? And for everybody, depending on what you're doing, what you're working on, that's different, right? And that's the thing that makes epilepsy so challenging is it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think that's why it's so important that you have to be armed with that knowledge. You have to hold your physicians accountable, because if they aren't telling you that, then, right? So anyways, that's just my babbling.
That's great. And I love that he just went from don't smoke skunk weed to the computer operating. So, yeah. And the one other one I'll say, and we'll change question, we'll move on, but really like missing meds. So if you think about like the basics would be like, you know, like sleep deprivation, missing meds, alcohol, those are like your big baddies. And then there's the list, if you look in the literature, the list goes on and on. And it gets like, if it's not you having them, you're like, oh, it gets fascinating. You know, you can have music triggered seizures, or reading triggered, or math triggered seizures, and all of that. But if it's you having them, it's not. Another question?
Yeah. My question was, I know that, is it Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, he said his was surgery. But what did you do to not have any?
I took Depakote. So yeah, I just took medication.
And that's been.
So when we think about epilepsy, there's generalized epilepsies, and then there's focal epilepsies that would typically could potentially need surgery. So for mine, it's like responds really well for me to that medication.
So do you have to continue to take it, or did you take it and it's?
Yeah. So
that's.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm still taking it now. And I always preach this to people, like, you know, we always say, like, don't just say I have epilepsy, or make sure your doctor, if there's an epilepsy syndrome or a more specific label they can give you, that's more helpful. Sometimes you can get a genetic diagnosis that's even more helpful. But so I'll like preach this to the residents left and right. Like, so yeah, at first they just said, well, you've got generalized epilepsy. Well, that's not super helpful. If you look at the EEG, the types of seizures you have, so I had a big seizure like a tonic-clonic, myoclonus, like quick muscle jerks, and then absence. So if you put those three together with my age, which I was a juvenile, you can kind of come to, we're going to have to be louder than those guys at the end of this thing. But we come to juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, and then we can sort of figure out, like, these are the drugs that treat it best, and we know, like, well, how long does that last? Because some of these, childhood absence, we're like, oh, you should probably outgrow that in a certain time. But for mine, I think the general thinking was like maybe 40, early 40s. And then my wife's like, your medicine's a mood stabilizer. Just keep taking that. She's like, you're already all over the place, man. Like, you stay on it. So yeah. Does that help?
It does. I'm just curious if, for the most part, if eventually you can be off of the medication.
Why are you people can be eventually, yeah. You put me like, I probably, if I was doing things right, like you would be like, and my doctor said, like, we're gonna check a level, we can start weaning you off. I talked about this with somebody. It's like, this guy was 45 today, and he's like been seizure free forever on Lamictal, and he's like, my doctor wants me to get off it, but he's like, it's like cocaine, man. He's like, you feel like, what I really like is not having seizures. And so when you've been a zillion years without it, you're like, but what if? And then I'm just like, that voice in my head will get, how loud is that guy gonna get? So as a doctor, it feels like one way to be like, okay, I think it's time to wean off your meds, pal. But then as the patient, you're like, what? Like, it feels very different. And I don't know that and maybe some doctors talk about that or not, but they probably don't spend a whole lot of time being like, well, how do you feel? Hopefully they will. Anybody else? I'll come back to you.
My question's actually for you. What recommendations would you have or advice would you give to a person who, having been in similar shoes, had medically withdrawn from high school and is watching all of their peers matriculate into college? And how do you get out of the stuck in the suck? Sorry, parents.
We won't count that one. That's a great question.
Sorry, that's like, it's tough because I don't, that's like your formative years of school. And obviously, I'm 40 years old, and I'm still very much grieving that time. So, you know, that part definitely doesn't get easier. But, you know, like with time, especially those relationships, like I kind of look back at it, it's like, well, you know, I learned who my true people are, right? And you feel like you're being left behind. You definitely aren't being left behind. I think my parents will tell you that. I was consumed with time and feeling like, what am I doing? Yeah, I couldn't even get to college. You know, like, how am I ever going to get caught up? You know, am I going to have to repeat, you know, I already repeated ninth grade. Am I going to have to repeat this again? And then all my friends are getting into their colleges and they're riding off in their cars, and I'm still stuck at my parents' house trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to do. It gets easier because I realize, like, obviously it's still painful for me to think about that person and think about you going through that. But life doesn't stop right there. And my life has been so full, and, you know, that struggle is something that, like, obviously had a lasting impact on me, but it made me very appreciative for my friends, my family. And then what I realized in the end is I wasn't being left behind. My road and my path was just a little different. It had lots of twists and turns, but I got to where I was supposed to be. And my friends didn't leave me behind. And I that's just what I could tell you. And I can't tell you anything that's going to make it less painful. Obviously, it's still painful for me. But there's a lot of good that's going to come out of it. Yeah.
And again, like, I would encourage you guys, like, stay in touch. Like, I think I gave out my number last year. Like, if you guys really, like, meet folks, stay in touch. If you need anything, man, come find us, come talk to us afterwards. We love doing that stuff, and we're so happy that you came, and we appreciate everything. Guys, we'll see you next year. All right. Hey, look, wait. In the count of three, we have to be so loud. These guys, I want them to be like, what the heck happened in there? All right, ready? 1, 2, 3.